afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we are delighted to have Natasha Pulley with us again to talk about our brand new book, The Hymn to Dionysus. And is that Dionysus? Is there a difference between the American pronunciation and the British Dionysus? Okay. And gorgeous cover here. And we're just looking into getting some signed UK editions. We don't have signed American copies, but I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field. And I may pop up later with the image of the UK edition because we understand it's very striking. So if you have questions for Natasha, go ahead and put them in the comments or chat field, and Barbara will summon me online towards the end of the hour. I'll be happy to ask any of your questions. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much. So this is my annual treat, getting to talk to Natasha. I never know where we're going. And her history, I'm going to go through her history because I have a couple of comments to make after we go through her history. I will say that she not only is internationally recognized for her amazing style and craft, but she's won various awards. The Betty Trask Award probably isn't going to say a lot to American audiences, but it's a very important British award. But you've also been listed for the Authors Club Best First Novel, the Royal Society of Literature's Encore Award, and the Wilbur Smith Adventure Rate. I love that one because, I mean, see, I think of Clive Cussler, but, you think of Wilbur Smith, but they're quite similar. And then you've been longlisted for the Walter Scott Prize, which, if I recall, is given to historical fiction, isn't it?
Yep, exactly.
Right. So one of the reasons it's always fun to talk to Natasha is we're always going somewhere different in place and frequently in time. And she is actually just ricocheted from 21st century Mars all the way back to ancient Greece. And in the process, I think it's my conclusion. Well, I'll tell you that in a minute. So let's go through this. The Watchmaker novels. The Watchmaker of Filigree, Steve, is Victorian England, right? London?
Yep.
And you sneak in a Japanese character, which allows you then to go to Japan with another book, right?
Absolutely.
Did you learn Japanese to do that?
I did. I lived in Tokyo for a year and a half, and then I went all the way up north to Hokkaido, which is that stingray-shaped island in the north of Japan, where the next land on is Russia. And I lived with a family there for a month, bumbling around and making everybody laugh.
Well, I'm going to write to you because I have spent an hour earlier today plotting around our trip to Hokkaido in October.
Oh,
And in Tokyo. So,
fabulous.
yes, so you are going to be able to give me all kinds of interesting information about Hakodate and Sapporo and Otaru and places we're going. It's going to be really exciting. It's our
Absolutely.
our
I
third
was right on the northernmost antenna. I was in a place called Shirotoko, which means the end of the world.
I
Just
know
accurate.
well. Yeah. I've always been interested in the Ainu or the Ainu, whichever way it's pronounced.
I
So
think.
a woman named Laura Jo Rowland wrote a really brilliant historical Japanese series that started with Shinju, I think it was. I've got them all over here. And she talked a lot about, the older Japanese up north, and then, the moving towards the shogun, all the rest of it. I've been lost on Shikoku. I've been to see the male and female bridge, all of that stuff. Anyway, love that one. Then the only time Natasha's ever been here, we were in Victorian Peru on an expedition to steal quinine, which the British were really big on stealing botanical goodies from other countries, like the rubber tree in Manaus in Brazil, quinine. Captain Cook famously brought home the breadfruit tree from the South Pacific to Kew Gardens. So that was kind of fun to do all that. The Lost Future of Pepper Harrow, is that the one where you went to Japan?
I was writing it while I lived there. Yeah.
Okay, so we're in Japan. Then we progress The Half-Life of Valerie Kay. We are in 1960s Cold War Russia. Natasha learned Russian for that. Очень хорошо. I brushed up on my Russian so that we could, which I haven't actually studied for like 50 years now, but nonetheless.
Отлично.
Yeah, ничего не понимаю. Right. The kingdoms, remind me what the kingdoms was.
It's set in an alternate version of the UK, mostly in Scotland.
Right. And that was 19th century?
Yes, so Napoleonic Wars.
Exactly. Okay. So we're kind of traversing reality, but not entirely as we move along. Then we come last year to the Mars house
Right.
where we actually went to Mars. And I thought the rationale for it, the envisioning what it would be like to live to try to adjust to a whole different gravity and a whole different society. You sort of left Earth in complete destruction behind, which was the impetus to go to Mars, right?
Yeah, I left Earth on fire and then moved to Mars. That's right.
She's okay. All right, so we know she learned Japanese. She's learned Russian. So it will not surprise you when she decided to go back to ancient Greece, that Natasha decided to study ancient Greek. Now, I will say this, that if you've learned Russian, you're somewhat ahead because part of the Russian alphabet derives from the Greek alphabet. In fact, the hardest thing about studying Russian for me was to unlearn the normal English alphabet, and assign a different value to it. The new characters, the Greek characters, are easy, right? Because they're new to
Yeah.
you. But it's really hard to remember that, a B is a V and, all the other stuff that's different.
Yeah, that can be tricky in Russian. Although I feel like my experience of learning Greek was maybe a little bit different because when your second language is Japanese, and then you learn some Mandarin as well. Like anything that's even distantly like English, you're like, yes, this is easy. So it was not with any great sense of dread that I was looking at Greek. And I think I learned the alphabet fairly quickly. That was not a horrifying pitfall. It was with Russian because there are so many letters that look like ours but are not.
Right.
Whereas I feel like with Greek it's less so.
Well, they are less so. And of course, they're partly embedded in the Russian alphabet because of the Russian Orthodox Church derives in part from the
Yeah.
from the
But I mean,
old
I,
Greek.
I think Greek is maybe a little bit easier because we use so many Greek signs in maths and physics. So
Right.
yeah, we've seen it before.
That's right. Pi is pi, right? We all know.
Right.
So I had this amazing experience that I thought about, Natasha, when I was reading the book. Some years ago, we were traveling um, in the Mediterranean. We stopped on Corfu, not Corfu, was it Corfu? What's the big island that's half
Greek.
Turkish and half Greek? Cyprus.
Oh, Cyprus. Yeah.
Cyprus, right. Sorry, confused there. I just read a book about Corfu. Anyway, we are on Cyprus, which has got sort of lines divided between Turkey and Greece. But one of the things we did was we stopped at this beautiful Greek amphitheater, ancient Greek amphitheater on this, views of the sea, kind of mountains behind it, just, stone benches, stage down there, views of the water was absolutely marvelous. And on the trip, there had been this kind of strange family with a guy. I would guess he was in his 30s, but he was clearly kind of neurodivergent and didn't mix well with everybody. But it turned out that when we got to this amphitheater, he had made this heroic effort. So while we're all kind of up looking down, he goes down to the stage and he turns around and this glorious voice rings out and he is reciting a play in ancient Greek. I mean, it
Wow.
was the most amazing thing to stand there and listen to the language, just
That's incredible.
reverberating. Oh my God, it was really, of course, none of us knew what he was saying, but nonetheless, the experience was so fabulous.
This is incredible, Barbara. Whenever I write a book, and whenever I talk to you, you always have a relevant holiday experience. I feel like we've been linked somehow across the years.
We really have. Well, travel, yeah, lots of travel. There we are. But I will also say that my view of the Greek god Bacchus and Dionysus, Bacchus, I guess, isn't that the Roman name for Dionysus? Or are they?
Yeah, but it's derived from his title in Greek. Bacchus means the raver.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, my experience of all this comes from Mary Renault, because The Bull from the Sea and The King May Die are two of my all-time, favorite. I mean, they're just so brilliant. And in part of that, when um, Theseus leaves, having killed the Minotaur and, taken the princess with him, they stop at an island where she becomes embedded with this bacchanal, and Theseus leaves her there and sails off. And so, my whole idea of who he is kind of shaped by Mary Renaud. So you obviously are taking a different look.
Yeah, a little bit. And I love Mary Renaud as well. Like I love the Theseus books and I love the Alexander books as well. So she's been a really big influence. She's one of the reasons I wanted to write a book set.
I'm so glad to know that because she's one of my favorite authors.
Oh, she's fab. She's really fab. I love her. So I listened to it all on audiobook.
Do you think she learned ancient Greek to write her books?
Well, if she didn't, she's bloody knowledgeable.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to remember if it was Mary or there's a wonderful Welsh, the Mabinogion, which is the Welsh mythology, sort of origin stories and all. And I think both of them talked about the fact that in these kind of darker, misty countries, where the light was not that bright and so forth, that women tended to have more power because procreation wasn't clearly understood. I don't know if the idea was it was so dark, nobody could see what actually happened. But anyway, women had...
where and how does that work? Yeah, that's great.
Exactly. And so women, tended to be much more powerful, and oftentimes men were, sacrificed once a year for fertility, the whole 9 yards. And then I think the thesis was, as we move towards, more habitable, sunlit desert countries and all, suddenly everybody figured out where babies came from, and men took over. And so we established a patriarchy much more than a matriarchy. And I mean, I don't know whether it's true or not, but I think it's a really interesting view of, the evolution of both power and religion, as people, kind of began to figure out the physical process involved.
You're right. I think it's really, really interesting. And like, there are so many theories about what it was. Like, why did we shift from apparently matriarchy to patriarchy? I think it's really interesting, this thing about kind of dark, misty countries. And for me, my theory is that it's to do with hunting. If you get your main if your main food source and your main living is derived from hunting rather than farming, it doesn't matter if it rains or not. It doesn't matter about the weather. Like what matters is the earth, and can you read the tracks on the ground? And then, it's a very strategic thing. Whereas suddenly, if you switch to farming, there's this big reliance on the rain, and then thunder gods become very important. And that's kind of like fertility, semen, you get all this stuff starting to arise. And rather than mother goddesses, we start to see father gods. And it's just interesting that seems to happen around the same time. There is this broad shift from hunting a lot to farming a lot. And it's not like societies go from one Tuesday morning go, right, we should be farmers now. Like, of course, that's silly. Like you farm for 6 months of the year, hunt for 6 months of the year. But I think after cities reach a certain size, hunting is limited unless you're upper class. So I don't know. There might be something to that. I read a book that said so anyway.
I think, well, we're never going to know the real truth, but I think we may be becoming more aware that there was much more widespread travel and cooperation in the ancient world than we may have believed. And
so much. It blew my mind researching for this book when I read, I think so. There's a wonderful scholar called Eric Klein who wrote about this, and he pointed out that tin from Tintagel in England, it's in Cornwall, it's on our south coast, has wound up in Syria and Egypt in the BC, and that's incredible. It means that people from the pre-classical Greek world were getting all the way around to Tintagel, which is unbelievable. Like we would never have thought they could see that, but they did.
Well, they sailed out through Gibraltar and, turned up north. And there really isn't any reason why they couldn't have, if you think.
Exactly. Because they were, particularly the Greeks were incredible sailors.
They were. Yeah, and there's a new book out. I'm trying to remember if it's called The Mesopotamian Riddle, I think, or The Mesopotamian something. But anyway, instead of talking about hieroglyphs and Champollion and how, the Rosetta Stone in the British Museum and the whole bit, it's talking about the earlier, the clay tablets and the
Oh, cuneiform. Yeah,
cuneiform. Yeah, thank you. I had a blank there for a minute.
that's
And
right.
now we're, with that being deciphered and more widely studied now, we're learning a lot more about, Babylon, the whole Euphrates Valley, because, for a long time, our whole focus has really been on Egypt. Whereas, China and all are older. Probably the Indus Valley is older too.
Yeah.
And maybe the reason that we have focused on Egypt for a long time is that their monuments were so big and they survived. Whereas,
It's the thing about archaeology, isn't it? And to some
yeah,
extent, ancient linguistics, you study what is available.
that's
So
right.
countries like Britain are wildly overstudied because Oxford University is like 2.5 minutes away from Stonehenge. So of course you send archaeologists to territories where it's easy to find stuff. Of course everybody goes to Egypt. There's a whacking great bunch of pyramids there that are really easy to see. Whereas if things have been lost in the desert and what is now Iran, it's very difficult to uncover what's going on. And, these texts are being found in caves, in pots down holes. I mean, Dead Sea Scrolls, perfect example. So I think it is really exciting to see what happens when that study moves away from the areas that are very easy to excavate.
I think you're right. So what prompted you to go from Mars to ancient Greece? I mean, what is it that interests you the most? Is it learning a new language? Is that a big impetus for you in terms of what you want to write?
Yeah, I mean, so firstly, what prompted me to move from Mars to Greece was I don't know, this instinct for career suicide, maybe. Like it's not done, Barbara, to go from science fiction to ancient Greece. And I'm just very grateful that I have an agent who just kind of views me with this weary tolerance now, and just goes out and sells whatever I put on her desk, which is incredible. So I'm very lucky. Um, one of the reasons that I wanted to write about Greece is ancient Greek. It's an amazing language, and I love learning languages. I'm I'm one of those odd people who studied Latin at school. I haven't. I have exams in Latin. I have qualifications, and I started learning a little bit of ancient Greek when I was at university because I had this hilarious tutor that would, give me Paradise Lost and say, in this section, Pulley, from your Greek, you will know that. And I would say, no, well, I don't know that. So I would go away and in the summer holidays, I would learn a little bit of Greek and I always wanted to come back to it. And then during the pandemic, there was literally nothing else to do. So I started writing this book about a god who mysteriously is not in the Iliad, apart from one joke. And it all just sort of spiraled out from there. But yeah, I taught myself Greek and I loved it. It was why I would get up in the mornings for a long time. And it was just fascinating that you never knew what new uncanny or wonderful thing you would find on the next page of what purportedly is this very dry history.
So were you, I have actually studied, I didn't read Latin. They didn't offer, but they did offer it in my high school, but I plunged directly into French. So
Nice.
like you, I love languages. So I learned French and I learned Spanish, Russian, German. But I never got to Latin. So I signed up for Duolingo a couple of years ago, which is, as you know, an app that where you can study language, and I think it's very good.
Good.
And so I'd have a more rudimentary knowledge of Latin, but my husband, who went to different schools, not only studied Latin but classical Greek at St. John's College. So irritatingly, while I can speak Russian, he can read it. Better
Ah,
than I can, I mean, it just annoys me no end. But when we've been to Russia, it's easier for him to penetrate, that melding of Latin and Slavic and, get to the Russian language. So I find that really fascinating. But I have not been moved to actually try to learn Greek. So I'm very impressed that you have
well,
done that.
it's so good. And actually, all credit to the people who wrote the textbooks that I learned from.
Hmm.
Um, we've got some very good textbooks in the UK. They're by a company called OCR. They're the exam board who does our qualifications here. And the books are by a great scholar called John Taylor. And he takes you through and you start reading real Greek quite early on, like a little bit edited to make it a bit simpler. And then as you go through, you end up reading Plato and the Iliad, and it's magic.
Well, there have been so many new translations. Well, not so many, but there have been at least two that I can think of, recent translations of the Iliad. Or maybe it's the Odyssey, now that I'm thinking about it. It is the Odyssey.
Yeah,
But,
it's
you know,
Emily Wilson, right? The beautiful
yeah.
translation of Odyssey. I love it. It's so good.
Well, I'm going to reread it because my memory of the Iliad and the Odyssey comes from a very long time ago. When I
Mm.
was in grammar school in the fifth grade, whatever equivalent that is in the UK, I had read my way through the entire Crow Island School library. And the only thing they had that I hadn't read was Bullfinch's Mythology, this massive tome, which was pretty racy for fifth graders.
Wow, it is racy, right? They
Anyway,
chop
they,
stuff.
they decided that a board barber was more dangerous so they let me read Bullfinch and I loved it. I mean, I love fairy tales. I had read like the yellow and the green and the red book of fairy tales and Brothers Grimm and all. I thought Bullfinch and the Greek myths were far more interesting than fairy tales. So that part, I studied in depth when I was very, very young. And I have to say that if you're grounded in Greek mythology, it illuminates so much of, our culture, our literature, our understanding of things. And I've always been grateful that I had that opportunity. We carry Edith Hamilton's mythology at the bookstore. And in the pandemic, sales of stuff like that began to tick up. And now I see on a fairly regular basis that people are reading Hamilton. I think she's kind of replaced Bullfinch for whatever reason. So, there's clearly an interest in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a big interest. And I think it's interesting that you say about the pandemic, because I feel like that's the time when people sat back and went, what if I always wanted to study but never had the chance to? And it was the time, wasn't it, where we all just had this dead 2 years. It
We
was,
had free time and we weren't doing distracting things like driving, for example, or traveling or other things. We had it very easy here because everything is so big and so wide open that,
Mm,
we didn't have anything like the restrictions that, at least in Arizona, that you had. But nonetheless, things were very quiet.
yep.
You didn't go out. And so, yeah, I think, and we're seeing that at the moment in the parlous state of our present situation here in the United States. We've been really interested that book sales went up like 30% in February, that people are reading for escape, they're reading for
Yeah.
comfort. We are, or try to be, apolitical, and just offer people a civil and, you know, um, entertaining, comforting place to come and get together. We've seen a lot more people come to events than did, for it took a while after the pandemic for people to feel like, they wanted to get into groups again. But I've been really pleased at the size of our live audience. Our virtual audience, the streaming audience, has grown as well. So, I think it's sort of natural in hard times for people to want to escape into someplace else. And, maybe it's lessons in survival, that
Oh,
we
yeah. But I mean, I think it's no coincidence that it's immediately after the end of World War II that we see Lord of the Rings and the Narnia novels.
good
They're
point.
from the early 50s, so they would have been being written in 1945. So I don't, yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
No, you're right. Well, let's talk about the hymn to Dionysus, having gone all
Oh,
around the bush here. Tell us, because you have some interesting characters in here. Tell us all about them.
absolutely. So the hymn to Dionysus is narrated by a soldier called Phaedrus. He's just got back home after the Trojan War. He lives in Thebes and things are not good. He arrives home in the middle of a famine. It's very, very, very hot and things are going wrong. So the whole city is full of people sacrificing to try and appease the gods, but people are dying, people are starving, nothing works. And he realizes that he's having a bit of a crisis of identity because he's just fought a 10-year war, 10-year raiding tour, during which time he's never come home. And he's starting to think, well, why did I do that? What was the point? What's the point of living like this? And he writes a prayer to a god who he met when he was much, much, much younger. And I don't want to tell you about that because it's fun and it's cool, and I want people to read it. And essentially, he asked this god to come and take revenge for a terrible thing that Phaedrus did when he was young. And only a few hours later, something screams out of the sky and lands in this huge explosion that vitrifies the sand of a parade ground. And Phaedrus is pretty sure that he sees someone come out of it. And he has no idea what's going on, but he's pretty sure that a god has come to Thebes and that god is going to come and kill him. And that is the start of his relationship with Dionysus.
Oh. So blue-eyed boy, blue-eyed god is very big in this. What was interesting about blue-eyed? Because was that not normal? I mean, the Greeks.
No, it was very, very unusual. So that comes from a slightly fudged translation of a poem that is actually genuinely called The Hymn to Dionysus, from which I nicked the title of this novel. The Greek word is kaianos, which probably means very, very bright black, but it's the word that we get our word cyan from, for bright blue. So they use it of people's hair, but they use it of eyes, they use it of lapis lazuli. So it's just any like very, very deep color. And I thought, oh, well, blue eyes, it's just weird for the Greek world. So, and I wanted something that marked him out as really strange. So so Phaedrus comes across Dionysus several times through his life, but he's always looking for somebody with blue eyes. So that's how he recognizes him. And I think this theme of this idea of struggling to recognize somebody you knew as a child, it really permeates a lot of Greek literature. And I think it sounds really silly to us that you might not recognize somebody who you knew, but this is a world where you could be away from home for 15 years and you'd have no idea what your parents look like at the end of that. So a lot of Greek plays hinge on people not recognizing each other, which this seems so artificial now, but I think then would have been very realistic.
Well, Oedipus comes to mind right off the bat.
Well, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
Yes, no, we also have to remember that people had much more compressed, the time frame for life was so much shorter, that people, became adults at a much younger age. They married younger, they reproduced younger, they died younger. And so that also, I think, has an effect that, the gods.
Absolutely. I mean, I was shocked when I read about kind of the age that people were in the army in Sparta, on which a lot of the culture in Thebes in this book is based, because there aren't a lot of records about Thebes. If you were in the Spartan army, you would retire from the army aged between 30 and 35. Like that was old to be in the army. And if you survived that long, you were very lucky because the chances were that you probably wouldn't. So that like the turnover is unbelievable.
Yeah, I know women had babies at such a young age. They were, in our view, children themselves when they did. And many of them, of course, died, from too much childbirth or complications of childbirth. But
Totally.
a man could have 3 or 4 wives, in the course of his life because
Yeah.
failing, battle or disease, men had a better chance generally to live longer than women. I mean,
if they were rich. I think this is an interesting thing. Like, and also it really varies city to city in ancient Greece. So in Athens, it's very normal for Athenian girls to be married by 14. In Sparta, they're not even considered for marriage until they're 18. So like, if you were a woman in Sparta, you had it real good in comparison to women in Athens who were basically kept prisoners inside their own homes. Whereas Spartan girls, ran races. It was important for them to be physically fit. It was pretty impressive. So like it's really different city to city. And yeah, so if you were living in kind of a warrior, like a military state like Sparta or Thebes, like the men didn't have a great life expectancy either. So I tried to reflect that in the book. Like Phaedrus doesn't expect to get past 40. He's 30 now.
Right. No, I can certainly see that. There's a really good modern series, crime novels by Jeffrey Seigert that are all set in Greece, starting out with Murder in Mykonos, but he has ranged around. He lives in Greece half the year. And the book, I think it's called Sons of Sparta, but I can't remember the exact title. But anyway, part of it was the geography. I mean, the landscape of Sparta was very different from the landscape of Athens or, and I think that had a lot to do with it too. I mean, some of it was cultural, but I think some of the culture arose from, the geography and general living conditions. Were they farmers? Were they hunters? Were they on the sea? Were they, you know?
I really agree. I think these two things like feed into each other. And like, and again, like one of my favorite things about Sparta is it had no city walls. So it's on this even plain, like very easy to invade in theory, but it's their big thing that they have no city walls. They don't need them because their army is so terrifying.
Yeah, well, they had some pretty, I mean, isn't it the Spartan boy, you know, the one that was trained so that, what was he holding, a fox or something? And he stood there while the fox ate his entrails right in
Oh
front.
yeah, that's the story.
Oh,
Yeah, that's the
yeah,
that's the
I hope it's
story.
apocryphal. I've always hoped it was apocryphal.
That's the story.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, I think is that in Plutarch, who wasn't there, but it's
I can't
yeah,
remember,
there are all
but
these stories about Spartans and their manners, and that like they're described very much the way that samurai are described, actually, kind of on
yes,
honor
I've
rules.
always thought that there was kind of almost a through line, you know, between the Spartan culture and the Bushido culture in, you know, in Japan. So one of the things I did when I read the first part of your book was I refreshed my memory of the gods. So I looked up Helios and Selene, and what's the other one's name? Starts with an A. Um, his sister, Helios's sister.
Oh, Agave, yeah.
Right. And you know, the gods evolved also. I mean, that's one of the other things I think is interesting is that, you know, Helios, the sun god, eventually, you know, we think of him as Apollo. And, you know, Selene, the moon goddess, we think of her now really more as Diana. And Eos, was she the dawn god? Was that goddess? Is that what she was?
Oh, we don't know.
I think so. But she had anyway, I mean, some of it is because the Romans they borrowed the Greek pantheon and they named a lot of the gods. But even in Greece, I think they evolved from, you know, like Titans, um, you know, much Cronus, all those people into more sophisticated gods.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a really great point to make. And I think gods change in the same way that words change. There's kind of theological drift in the same way that there's linguistic drift. You know how the meaning of words changes across centuries? The meaning of gods changes across centuries as well. And a god that is very, very relevant to a hunter culture in 5000 BC will not necessarily be so relevant to a city culture in 1300 BC. So this is a very different world, and they will prioritize different natural forces, different gods. So I think you're completely right. And one of the things I was interested in this book is the kind of the rising and falling of gods. And Dionysus is really interesting on this front because about 20 years ago, a lot of scholars thought that he was a relatively new import into the Greek pantheon. There's this sense that he's a foreigner because in the mythology, Dionysus is always a stranger who comes from far away. And there was a sense that maybe he was an Indian god who'd been imported. But it turns out now that Linear B tablets have been deciphered and people have managed to read, the tax records of various temples from across the Mycenaean world, which was, Greece as was, that Dionysus is probably one of the oldest gods we have. Like, he certainly predates Zeus. There are offerings of wine and honey to Dionysus as far back as about 3000 BC. So he's real old. And I thought that was really fascinating.
It is fascinating, but you know, didn't people begin to make wine practically as soon as they spotted anything that would ferment? And so, you know, it's not surprising to me. I mean, the Greeks assigned like a nymph or a dryad or whatever it was to practically anything. You know, it was a tree, it was a stream, whatever there would be. And that's also very true in Asian culture, you know, that there would be gods very specific to some feature of the landscape. But clearly, you know, with wine being an important, and part of the reason wine was so important, and true, you know, I learned this about beer in Egypt, is that the only way to purify the water was basically to turn it into alcohol, because otherwise, if you drank it, you were probably going to die. And I'm sure that was a trial and error system, you know, where people drank and died, and then they figured out gradually that people who were drinking wine didn't die, and, you know, went on from there, which was also true. There's a wonderful book years ago I read. It was a mystery, but it was set at one of the old cataracts in Egypt. And part of the deal was that, you know, they would gather up whatever the bread was left over every night so they could, you know, merge it with the Nile River water and turn it into beer. And that's basically what they all lived on was, you know, I mean, there were calories in it, but but it was also water that was safe to drink. I mean, we look back and in the Middle Ages, and you look at the amount of liquor that people drank, it was just extraordinary, but it was safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not at all surprised that a god, associated with wine, whether we call him Dionysius or Bacchus, would be a really old god, not a
Yeah.
new.
Definitely. I think
Drink
that's
while you were
absolutely right.
So did you drink while you were reading about him? And if you did, what were you drinking?
Oh God, of course I drank. It was the pandemic. I was always drunk. I mean, I think this book arises from like drunken hallucinations, honestly. And also, if you want to sit down and read any essays, scholarly essays about Dionysus, you kind of have to be drunk because they're so nonsensical. And one of the reasons for this is that nobody really understands what he's the god of. And it's so I read so many papers before I went, these guys don't know what they're talking about. I just feel like a lot of Victorian scholars took a lot of drugs and then hoped for the best.
Right. Yes, they certainly did. Well, I've climbed around among many Greek ruins and many Greek islands, and we're going to Sicily in May. And, some of the better Greek ruins are actually in Sicily, as
Oh
well
yeah,
as
yeah, they expanded outwards.
coast.
Absolutely. I mean, so a lot of if you go to Turkey as well, there's a lot of
Exactly.
Greek ruins in Turkey because it was a Greek colony until quite recently.
Indeed. Oh, I know. So, you find these big temples like to, Diana or whatever, but you also can find small things that were dedicated to various gods. Part of it was, again, coming back to health, that some of the medical treatments just involve people going somewhere where they got food that was nutritious, they got safe water or wine, whatever it was to drink, they got clean because there were bathing facilities there and they were warm. And, I think about like the Roman soldiers in Bath in Britain, no wonder they liked Bath. They were freezing their asses off there in Britain, but at least in Bath they could go and plunge.
And it is so fun. Like I live really close to Bath.
Very good.
It was so when I used to live there, and when I first lived there, I went around the museum where there's like bits of Roman stuff everywhere, and there are these great letters that Romans sent from around there, and they're basically all like, "Mom, send more socks. It's awful here."
Yeah. I actually drank the water one time.
It's
And
gross, right? It just tastes of blood. It's
terrible
disgusting.
stuff. But I mean, it's because of the minerals, because it's basically a volcanic
Yeah,
thing that's
I mean, I want to
going on
think
there.
so, but maybe not.
I love Bath, I
It'd
still
just be the lead pipes,
now, I mean, the layers of history in Bath are so amazing. There used to be a kitchen somewhere in Bath. It was like a little restaurant. I can't remember the name of it, but it was like Roman ruins with an Elizabethan fireplace, and then an 18th century, probably a dog spit, and then the 20th century thing. They were selling Bath buns or something, and I thought, this is so great that you could just stand there with these layers of history in front of you. It's kind of like going to Rome and going down into some of the churches that dig down into the Roman.
Absolutely. Be like, welcome to Europe, man. Like you dig under London, there's more London. Dig under Rome, there's just more Rome. It goes all the way down.
There is, I was going to tell you that I have a new a thing called the London, is it the Time Machinist? I have to look this up. But anyways, the Substack, and this guy writes these wonderful histories of London all the time. And he's colored this gigantic 1740 map of London, and he's color coding it so that you can see changes, and you can, I mean, it's amazing. I think it's called the London Machinist. Anyway, I'll send you a link to it, because when I was talking to the author of Fagin the Thief, a new book that has come out, Allison, it'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, sorry, senior moment there. But she writes a Substack called Dirt Bags of History, which, and I'm telling you, it's wonderful. So Allison Epstein, her name is, and she lives in Chicago and associated with Northwestern. But anyway, once you sign up for Dirt Bags of History or whatever it is, then you get some other Substack stuff that comes to you, like the London Time Machinist. And so I'm really enjoying it. But you are so right. It's just like layers and layers and layers. Well, Greece, of course, would be better. So have you actually been to Greece?
Yeah. I've been a few times, and it's kind of like one of the things that I did when I was writing this book was I went to Crete and I walked around Knossos,
Me
which is
too.
the labyrinth, the great labyrinth with the Minotaur. And it's unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. And they've restored little bits of it. And it's just like it really is a labyrinth, and they really did have buildings that are about 5 stories, two underground, two up. I mean, this would have been colossal for people at the time. And crucially, this I think was the most interesting thing that I learned while I was there. You know, we were talking about matriarchy shifting to patriarchy, patriarchy shifting to matriarchy. There's a strong scholarly argument for that dominant culture on Crete. It was a matriarchy because if you look at all the images that are on the walls, it's the women who are always showcased. It's the female figures who are always like front and center and very big, and often men are small and in the background, which kind of gives you the impression, if the same logic is true of like Egyptian art, then the big person is the important person. And so the important people were perhaps the women. It was really fascinating.
Well, I think that lots of the bull leapers were women because they were smaller and, could do that whole somersault act over
It's
the
very
bull. But,
acrobatic, isn't it?
the
Yeah,
thing I love
definitely.
about kenosis, I mean, only in Victorian days could an actual British guy buy an entire archaeological site called
It's
Knossos.
crazy.
It was a mound, and Arthur Evans, thought, well, I'll just buy it here from Crete, and then I can dig at it and do whatever I want with it. And so there is some, skepticism about his restorations, that some of them were kind of his own vision. I mean, I have all kinds of
Oh,
photos.
almost certainly. I mean, like Victorian archaeologists are not to be trusted. So Schliemann, like the guy who excavated Troy, just made stuff up. Like it's crazy. We have no idea really what was there, and so many of those archaeological expeditions are destroyed evidence,
Well, they
which
did, but nonetheless, there was an underlying foundation of fact.
well,
There really was a kingdom in Crete, and there really was Minos and his, which we come back to Mary Renault here because that's what that's all about. And you really, there was an important, um, you know, dwelling place at Knossos, and even if it isn't the Arthur Ellen, Arthur vision of it, still, it's great to go there. I mean, you can sort of feel the ghosts, right?
oh, you really can. It's incredible. And I mean, like, I'm one of these people who would never ever see a ghost or perceive anything like that because like my brain is made of graphs. But it's just that even I could feel it walking around Knossos. Absolutely incredible. And it made, yeah, like it really helped to write while I was there and in Greece on the mainland as well.
Great. Maybe I
Just
can
the
shift you
feeling for
towards
things.
writing a book set in Crete because I think Crete is way underrated. Everybody writes about Greece, but Crete, I think, is absolutely fascinating.
Wow, I mean, like the mainland Greece was using the Cretan writing system.
That's right.
So it must have been the important cultural center. I don't know.
Probably was. Well, I mean, even today, it's the placement of it is pretty key to the Eastern Mediterranean. Sort of like Malta in the middle, there was a reason that the British, put a naval base in Malta because they kind of controlled the middle and then in Gibraltar at the far end. But back in the day, really, if you think about it, Crete was instrumental for the Aegean as
I
opposed to
think
the
it was
Mediterranean.
the I think it was the main like crossover point for traders who were coming to and from Egypt.
That's right.
It's
Absolutely.
right at the top of that. Yeah. So I think it is crucially placed. I think you're right.
So you had a marvelous time writing this beautiful book.
Yes.
At the end, what do you feel was really the heart of this story? What was it that you really wanted the reader to take away?
I came to my own idea of what Dionysus is the god of. And it was that question that made me really start writing the book. Because, okay, he's this ancient god, offerings are made to him thousands of years ago, and all of Greek theatre is dedicated to him. All of, so the great theatre festival is the Dionysia in classical Athens. So what? It's odd to dedicate a theatre festival to a god who just seems to be about drunkenness. So I was really interested in, okay, why is he so important? What is this kind of elemental force that he seems to represent that goes far beyond drunkenness or madness? Like it's expanding into many other things. And I came to the conclusion, I think it's not revolutionary, but he's the god of catharsis, the god of release. And it coming to that realization changed the way that I was living. I started to think, honor Dionysus, do something just for Dionysus, not because it's productive, not because it's efficient, not because it will save money, but just for catharsis, just for Dionysus. And it made me a happier person within about 5 hours. And I've tried to keep doing that. And it works. And so I can really see why Dionysus was such an important god. I think I only understand this much of him, but it's been a significant couple of inches for me.
It's a really interesting way to look at it. And yeah, I can see what your point is about catharsis and revelry. I've always thought in part he was about celebration as well, you know.
I think anything that is to do with letting go. He's
Mhm.
like his symbol is the bull, so this huge wild animal. He's associated with the forest. He's called he of the trees. So this is a god of the wild, of bacchanalia, as you say, of kind of not just partying, but like raving revelry. So like not just like having a garden party, but really letting yourself go to the point that you don't remember what happened. So, and it's all about like release. It's getting everything out of your system, which I think is, yeah. So I think it's
Yeah.
all,
But I think the danger of him is that that can go too far. Hence
yeah.
the Bacchanalia. That was the Mary Renault thing, on the island, when it wasn't that it was terrible that they were drinking and dancing, is when they went much further. And
And
I think
they kill people. Yeah,
but I
absolutely.
mean, I think that's always sort of the tension with him is, that it's like going to a rave. I've never been to one, so this is never going to, I am one of those people that just, drugs and drink don't really interest me, partly because I can't read if I'm in that condition. So that's always been, but I think that there's a danger sign to Dionysus in that it can go too far. But as you point out, there's a really positive side to it in that, it can help people just like kick back and, or release things that are destructive. So maybe there is no
But I think this is
one
why
way, one way God. Maybe he has to be like that.
yeah, like that there are many gods, right? And that's why there are many gods. You don't want too much of any one of them. You don't want too much of Ares, like unrestrained war. You don't want your whole life to be Apollo and logic and charts. You need a little bit of everyone, and you neglect any one of them at your peril. I is the message that I came away from a lot of Greek literature with, and I think they're right.
Well, you never your time spent reading anything that Natasha writes is always thought-provoking, and well worth your while. And one thing we didn't mention, but I can say it because she's probably too modest to say it, is that she's a lovely stylist. She's really literate, has a lovely sense of pace. So it's always a joy to read her, regardless of what she's writing about, whether we're on Mars or back in Greece or Victorian Japan or stealing quinine in Peru, whatever it is. It's always an adventure. Patrick, come and talk to us for a moment. Did you find the book cover and any questions that might arise?
Let's see here. Let me see if I can actually do this. I did find the book cover
Okay.
somewhere, but then I went on and did other things. All right.
Yeah,
Let's see.
you're left them
Let me
behind.
see if I can get back to it.
Right.
Organized, I would have one to hold up, but I
Yeah.
don't because it's not out in the UK yet.
Let's see here. So what I found was the Australian cover, which I'm assuming is the same.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose Glance. Glances actually are for years Natasha's British publisher, was really a science fiction and fantasy publisher, but I'm not sure they are still in that focus.
Is that right?
Yeah, there you
That's it.
go.
That's it. It's yeah, you see it's really different, right? It
Well,
feels like it's marketed at a different crew of people.
wow, that
Very
is so
cool.
different. Yeah. And I like them both, you know. I don't think it's an either or thing. I think you can enjoy both of them. Look at that.
Yeah, I love them both. But I'm just really, really intrigued by how different
Mhm.
US and UK covers can be, like that different understanding of the same book.
Well,
Um,
it's not just the design. I didn't even show you the back. It's the color palette is so different. I mean, this one, Dionysus, you know, there's a wine palette here, you know, very lush, and you know, flame coming out of the temple. But I love the wine tinged palette of this book, and the UK book is clearly, you know, very much more science. I mean, you know, the bright yellow, the whole bit. Isn't that fascinating? But that's what, you know, the fun thing is. I will say for anybody watching it, the UK books are extremely expensive to get here. So it's only like we only get a little handful of them. It's just for people who really love, and there are people who really love Natasha's work, who are willing to pay, you know, these extravagant prices. And it's partly because the books don't swim here from London. So you know, the freight is a big part of the thing. But if you're interested, we're going to order a few. But I think myself that, you know, this version is just so beautiful. I
it's
really
good, right? A purple book is a good book.
a good book. It's really a nifty palette. Truly it is. All right, Patrick, any questions?
Um, you know, not especially. And the one that came in, you know, what inspired you to write about Dionysus? You've obviously had answered that question. Any TV or film stuff going on?
The Dionysus, no. It would be quite rare to see that at such an early stage for a book. Usually you'll see TV interest if something has done really, really well. It has to be popular enough for people kind of outside the book world to have
Uh,
noticed it, or you have to know someone who knows someone. So no.
what about for the rest of your novels? You had any adaptations made
Yeah.
or
So we've sold the rights to a couple of things, but you know, it doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't mean it'll actually be made. So I would love it to happen. It would be absolutely magical, but I don't want to rely on it, you know, and I don't want to curse it.
What are you working on now? Because, you know, it's a long time between finishing a book and presenting it as we are today. So you've had time to presumably dive into something else.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, the next manuscript is due in May, so I'm nearly done, which I'm really happy about. I'm on time. So the next one is completely different again. It's set in the modern day and it is in England. It's set in an imaginary village in the English countryside and takes place at a Catholic shrine that is down a salt mine.
Wow. Okay. So did
Different again, right?
you stopped at Lourdes on your way home from Greece or what?
This is the thing. I've spent some time in Rome. I'm now one of those people who's just a kind of like Rome watcher, Catholic watcher. I find it really fascinating. So the main character is a Jesuit priest.
Wow, it sounds fascinating. I was going to ask her if she was ever going to write something modern, and now, now
Ah,
we
it's here. It's here.
we'll be able to talk about that. This is a significant year, though, for Rome, and I'm trying to remember why, but every so often, and this is one of those years, there's some huge thing associated with Rome and the church. So they're expecting like quadruple the number of normal visitors to Rome and whatever. We're going to Venice and Florence in September for 10 days with the author of Brunelleschi's Dome and other wonderful books. Ross King, his name is, he's, you know, genius about Florence. And we're avoiding Rome for that very reason, that this
Oh,
is, you know,
wow.
this is not the best year to go to Rome because everybody else is going to Rome. Maybe it's sort of like the Hajj, in a slightly different
Yeah,
religion or something.
I don't know. I mean, like I've been watching going, oh my God, is there going to be another conclave soon? How long can the Pope hang on? Oh, maybe it'll be even busier than we think.
Certainly possible. I would really like to watch the Conclave. I remember reading the book. It's Robert Harris's book. The Conclave is what
One of
uh,
my favorites ever, Barbara. It's so good.
yeah. Well, and I also think the cast is amazing, isn't it, Ralph? What's his
It
name?
is.
Fine. How do we pronounce it?
Science and Stanley, how do you say his name?
Tucci?
Yeah.
Right.
They're both absolutely brilliant. I've seen the movie twice. It does the book justice. It's very, very good.
Wow. Well, I'm certainly looking forward to watching it. We'll see.
Oh, you're in for such a treat, honestly. Like, and it's like the cinematography is just
Yeah.
beautiful.
Wonderful. It's hard to find time to watch things when, there are like 2,000 new books coming out every week. I feel, I don't know
Absolutely.
about you, Patrick, but I feel like, if I can do 100 books a month, it's really kind of a triumph. And that is an absolute drop in the ocean of
Oh,
books publishing. It's amazing.
I can do like 5% of that.
I these days maybe 100 books a year for me.
Yeah.
well, I mean, I really do try to read all the books for our events, I can't talk to you if I didn't read your book. So
Right.
right there, that's a whole bunch. And then we have subscription book clubs. And Patrick reads for his club, and I read for some of them. Another member of our staff reads for one. Speaking of which, Patrick, I need your April hard-boiled pick when you get around to it. So there's only so much you can do. I feel like 100 to 120 is the absolute best I can do. And so sometimes you wind up just sort of highlighting things that everybody expects, like, the new John Grisham or the new this or that, where, you'd like to get to it and read it and offer a real critique, but really it's the books that nobody recognizes that you have to put your energy into, the first novels and all that kind of thing. So, I feel as though this is like inrushing tide that is going to swamp us. But on the other hand, how great to have so many different reading opportunities available. So,
It's true. It's
yeah.
true. As long as we don't drown, it will be fine.
Well, I probably, yeah. Anyway, always a pleasure to talk to you, Natasha. I never know what we're going to do, but I really love your books. I will look forward to reading about the Catholic shrine and a salt mine. Well, why not? Anyway, Hymn for Dionysus is a wonderful book to read. And if you don't know much about ancient Greece, or you haven't worked your way through Bullfinch or, Edith Hamilton or whatever, this will get you started. Good news is today you can actually Google some of these people and get a small idea of who the gods are. Beautiful book, lovely, lovely writing. So thank you very much, Natasha. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Bye, everybody.